So what do the British really think of the Germans? What do the British know about Germany? What are some of the preconceptions? More importantly, what are the misconceptions? And what are some stereotypes, some cliches, some stereotypes that maybe are true, maybe not? Let's find out now. Mahlzeit, Richie here again. Thank you for joining me here, and as I say, I'm going to be looking at some typical preconceptions of the British about Germany and the Germans, and maybe some misconceptions, things that are true, and I think there's going to be some surprises along the way, some things that not even the Germans are familiar with, some ideas that the British, in particular the English, have about Germany and the Germans that are sometimes completely wrong. For instance, do you know what a Stein is? It's not what you think. More on that later. The first obvious preconception that I can think of, the first preconcept idea that the British have of the Germans is that the Germans are a nation of beer lovers, beer drinkers and beer lovers. And I have to say, this one is true, definitely true, but there's another side to the story. The Germans are, of course, according to the statistics, the third biggest beer drinking country in the world, after the Czech Republic in first place and the Austrians in second place. And you know, Austria, Germany, is it that big of a difference? The Germans are, of course, quite rightly well known for their quality beers. Types such as Pilsner, Schwarzbier, Weizenbier, Altbier, Kölsch, Helles, the list goes on, but they all, of course, are brewed according to the quality principles of the Reinheitsgebot, the purity law, which dictates they have to be made of the same core ingredients that make up beer. So yes, Germans are well worthy of their reputation of being a beer producing and beer drinking nation, but it's only half the story. What about Germany's wines? There are many different wine making regions in Germany, particularly in the south, where the climate allows both the cultivation of white and red grapes. So you've got white, rosé and red wines. There is a really great variety and some great quality wines to be found in the regions of Franconia, Baden, Württemberg, Mittelrhein, Mosel, Hessische Bergstraße, und. So yes, the Germans are indeed big beer drinkers and big beer producers, but also wine drinkers. Their palate is a lot more multifaceted than just drinking beer. So I'm going to file this one under a misconception that is accurate, but also not completely the whole story. So neither false nor true. This second preconception, I'm going to say it right out from the start, this is definitely a misconception, so a false stereotype. It's the idea of what is typically German. What do the British think is traditional, typical German? And basically, it's an image that is, if you've lived in Germany or spent any time in Germany, you know that it's really a Bavarian image. The idea that traditional German clothing is Lederhosen, that when Germans get together, they all wear Lederhosen and listen to Oompa music, and basically you see this everywhere in any German themed bar, particularly in the UK or in America. You visit a German bar, it will normally be called the Ratskeller or something equally cliched, and it will be full of imagery from the south of Germany, in particular Bavaria. And sticking with the theme of beer, the subject of beer, we all think that Germans drink beer out of big liter, out of a mass, basically. What's called a mass in Bavaria, what you'll find at Oktoberfest. It really is a preconception that has endured to this very day. People come over to the north of Germany or to the west of Germany and they're wondering, where are all the people wearing Lederhosen? Where are all the big litres of beer? They go to Cologne and they're expecting litres of beer, and then the waiter comes out and says, here's your Kölsch, and it's just this little bitty 20 centilitre glass. It's really quite weird. File this one under big misconception. Germany is much more than Bavaria. Now we're moving on to my third preconception that the British have of the Germans, and we're sticking somewhat to the subject of beer. Do you notice a recurring theme here? Points 1, 2 and 3, although different, they all have something to do with beer, so one preconception does seem to be very correct. The Germans are pretty much defined by their beers, even though they like wine. And this is another thing that's pretty much borrowed from this concept of the Germans as being Bavarians, about the typical image of Germany being all things Bavarian. And it's sticking with this theme of what Germans drink their beer out of. Now, this is something that you can find all over Germany, and the Germans, I'm going to say what the Germans would call it. It's a ceramic mug for drinking beer. Germans would call it a Bierkrug. Now, for whatever reason, the British seem to think this is a Stein. Yes, they've inherited this word, they've taken on this word, this perfectly good German word, Stein, which is a stone, and they think this is a beer mug, a ceramic beer mug. And there's this big preconception that that is indeed how Germans drink their beer. They're usually, of course, half a litre or a full litre. Sometimes they have that decorative metal lid on the top. But the truth is, in Germany, this is much more of a collector's thing, and maybe like an idea for a gift, a souvenir if you've been on holiday to somewhere, you've been camping on the Mosel River, and you'll get a mug with the town, I don't know, Kochen, Bernkastel. Well, in England we call that a Stein, and I think we're convinced that that's the correct word. It's kind of like, I don't know, some of the strange English anglicisms, strange English names that the Germans give to things like their mobile phone. Their smartphone is still a Handy. But no, the Germans do not have a monopoly on you misappropriating the language of the other nation. STEINS. Oh yes, the plural is Steins, not Steine, STEINS. Moving on then to another preconception that I'm going to say is not a misconception at all. For whatever reason, the British have got the right idea about this. This is a very genuine, universal German tradition. You find it all over in the north, south, east and west of Germany, and it's a fantastic tradition. Long may it persist. The afternoon coffee and cake. Particularly on a Sunday, Germans like to partake in a bit of coffee and cake, and in my experience it's far too quickly after having eaten the big Sunday meal, because also like the idea of a Sunday family meal, big family roast or whatever is something we have in common in the UK and in Germany. Family will get together and eat a large lunch on a Sunday, and then seemingly just a few hours later, an hour or two later, it'll be time for coffee and cake. You're all ready stuff, but there's always some space there for Obsttörtchen, Erdbeerkuchen, Rumflocken, Sahnetorte, Streuselkuchen, Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte, Mohnkuchen, Marmorkuchen, Käsekuchen mit Himbeeren, Rhabarberkuchen, Sachertorte, Bienenstich, Apfelkuchen. If you don't want any cake, you can have Streuseltaler, Rosinenschnecke, Nussecken, and you know what these are called? Eiterbrille. Yes, so where in England it's typical to sit down and have a pot of tea and a cream tea, scones with jam and clotted cream, the Germans have coffee and cake. The Germans have good taste. Sorry to interrupt the video, but just a quick reminder that if you are enjoying the content and want to see more videos like this, please do give me a thumbs up, like the video, and if you have not already done so, subscribe to the channel. I would be very grateful. Thank you very much. Moving on to another preconception that I'm going to say right from the start. It's a misconception. It's a really funny story that I don't think a lot of the Germans are going to be aware of. You'll notice in my list of cakes, we're sticking with the subject of cakes. No more beer, no more coffee, we're just sticking with cake at the moment. In my list of German cakes, you won't have heard the word Battenberg, or as the English say, Battenberg. And there's a very good reason for that. Despite what the English think, Battenberg or Battenberg cake, Battenberger Kuchen, Battenberg Kuchen, it's not German. We are looking at a very, very typically English cake. Okay, looking at the history of it, it does have a German link, but the perception in England is that this cake, which is a strange square type cake, it's like a Swiss roll if it was squared. The inside is made up of 4 separate squares. It's all welded together with a big layer of marzipan. It's quite alright, it's okay. It's a sponge cake with marzipan. And marzipan, okay, it's quite typically German, probably more typically Viennese or Austrian. Mozart's balls. Anyone know about Mozart's balls? But it turns out the Battenberg cake that we all grow up with in England, thinking it's something very German, is probably more English than an English cup of tea. The name Battenberg, or Battenberg as it probably should be pronounced, is of course of German origin, and that's because although it's an English invention, it was invented in 1884 apparently to celebrate the marriage of Prince Louis of Battenberg with Princess Victoria, who was I think she was the grandmother of Queen Victoria. She was a Princess Victoria of Hesse and by Rhine. I'm not much of an expert on the royal family, as you can tell. The Germans seem to love the royal family. Would you like them? Do you want to take them off us? Since then, of course, the Battenberg cake has been a very common staple in any English diet. I certainly ate lots of it when I was growing up. Incidentally, the name Battenberg, the German Battenberg family, the name got anglicised over time, and they are referred to as the Mountbattens. The aristocratic family of the Mountbattens, that line is well known in England. Well, it's the same thing as Battenberg, if you didn't know. Another thing we British think when we think of the Germans, we think that the Germans are completely obsessed with their cars. Now, there is some truth in this preconception in that Germany is quite rightly well known for making quality cars. Volkswagen or Volkswagen, I think the English pronunciation would be BMW, BMW, Mercedes, etc. Yes, we say Mercedes and not Mercedes, but then again, Mercedes is a Spanish name, I believe. So who's pronouncing it right? Who's pronouncing it wrong? The Spanish are pronouncing it right, maybe? I say potato, you say potato, you say Bierkrug, and I say Stein. So are the Germans really obsessed with cars? Well, I can't really confirm that either way, really. In my private life, I don't really associate with a load of petrol heads or anything, and I don't get the impression that people are really obsessed with their cars. I certainly know a lot of Germans who have got a very ecological outlook, and they're happy to live without a car and use public transport. We have, of course, got some of the best public transport in Europe here in Germany. I certainly think so anyway. But there is one thing that leads me to think that, yes, maybe the Germans, or at least the German state, is a bit obsessed with cars, or with at least with its car manufacturers. What on earth is going on with the Volkswagen diesel scandal? It was proven in court that the board of Volkswagen was guilty of consistent and intentional deceit, falsifying their emissions results and really pulling the wool over the eyes of their consumers, and they seem to get off with it pretty lightly in a court case, delaying. The final decision came, and they don't even have to offer any compensation to clients who purchased cars after 2015, because apparently everybody knew about it by then and they were no longer deceiving people. I think they got off with it pretty lightly. And also you have at the same time a BMW company which is paying out millions and millions in dividends to its shareholders. Although we're in the middle of a coronavirus crisis, it seems that's the priority. Yes, the dividends are lowered, but they are still paying out millions to their shareholders, but at the same time holding out their hand and taking state aid, and the government is going along with it. So is it a preconception and a misconception that the Germans are really obsessed with their cars? Well, on the one level I would say yes. Privately, I'm not sure that we're a nation of petrol heads here all polishing their cars on a Sunday, but then again the car industry lobby seems very powerful here and has a big influence on the government. One final point then, one final preconception that the English and the British have of the Germans, and no list would be complete when we're talking about German preconceptions and stereotypes and cliches. No list would be complete without the mention of sausages. Yes, Germans are very well known for their sausages. Being a bit of a pedantic linguist, I'm going to have to insist on making a bit of a distinction here, because sausages aren't always sausages. Certainly in English, when we think of sausages, we're thinking of what the Germans would probably refer to as Würstchen. So smaller sausages that you would eat individually and whole. But also the term for sausage, the generic term for sausage in German is Wurst. But if you talk about Wurst and not Würstchen in the diminutive form, you probably think more of what we would call cold cuts, delicatessen type things. So large sausages that are designed for slicing. So things like salami, Fleischwurst, all these kind of things that are cold cuts that you'd get from the deli counter, what the Germans would call Aufschnitt. This is still all classed as sausage or Wurst in Germany, so maybe it's a bit of a misconception, because in the English language when we talk about sausages I think we're talking about what the Germans would call Würstchen, so Bratwürstchen, Bockwürstchen, stuff that you eat whole with chips or potatoes, lots of potatoes. The Germans eat a lot of potatoes. I should add that to my list. That said, the Germans do of course eat 2.5 million tons of Wurst or sausage every year, and there are 1,500 varieties. And Wurst will probably always be an important part of the German diet. But did you know that the #1 fast food in Germany is no longer Currywurst or Bratwurst? No, it is of course the Doner Kebab or Döner Kebab. I'm sorry, the English don't know how to pronounce the German Ö, so it's Doner Kebab where we come from. It is indeed a German invention, or a Turkish German invention, the idea of this large rotisserie skewer with the meat on and putting that in what is like a pita bread. Supposedly that was invented in Berlin. The word dönmek is a Turkish verb that means rotate, and döner is a Germanized version of the word to describe this rotary skewer meat sandwich thing. Döner, kebab. And even more interesting when it comes to talking about the traditional German staple in the German diet of sausages is the fact that, statistically speaking now, almost 10% of the German population, around 8 million people in Germany, are vegetarian. They eat no meat at all, and around 1 million to 1.5 million of those are indeed vegan, so no animal products at all. Something like 1.6% of the population of Germany is vegan, and apparently it's 200 new vegans every day. 200 more people convert and become vegan in Germany every day. That makes Germany one of the most vegetarian, most vegan countries in Europe, behind I think only Switzerland, where 11% of the population are vegetarian and some 3% are completely vegan. I'm going to end the video on a sporting note, and as you can see I am a big football fan. This is one that's between the English and the Germans, so sorry Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland and Ireland. This one is all about England and Germany, and it's a big preconception that the Germans, when it comes to football, that they are very good penalty takers. They're very good at taking penalties. Now, is this true? It's actually a German study into the statistics of penalty taking at World Cups and European Cups in international football that has revealed that the English aren't quite as bad as we thought, and the Germans aren't quite as good as we thought. When it comes to scoring penalties during the game, during the normal 90 minutes or in extra time, not an actual penalty shootout, the English have a really great success rate of 90%, putting away 90% of all their penalties. The Germans, on the other hand, only score 75%. So the English are in fact better. Erzähl aber weiter, Engländer. Das ist nicht die ganze Geschichte. Yes, German me, you're quite right. I'll carry on. Yes, German me is quite right to point out that when it comes to penalty shootouts, at the end of a game to decide the game, suddenly the performance of the Germans skyrockets and they have an 82% success rate, putting away 82% of their penalties in that really tense pressure situation, and the English performance drops to a measly 60%. That's why we've lost so many penalty shootouts, and we're going to be haunted by images like this for the rest of our lives.
He's hit it too straight. It just went at the goalkeeper. Oh dear, it's West Germany.
Well, that's it from me and from German me also. As you can see, after the game, after the video, we did a Trikottausch and we changed shirts. We continue to be friends and live in peace, full of admiration for each other, just like our two great nations, because I think despite all the preconceptions and some of the misconceptions and stereotypes, the image we have as British of the Germans is generally positive. There is much admiration. Yes, there is some rivalry, especially when it comes to sport, but I think at the end of the day we have a lot of respect for the Germans, and despite the misconceptions, we do really think the Germans have a great culture, but I'm biased anyway. I am happy to wear both the English shirt and the German shirt and carry both passports, so that makes me pretty weird probably. But anyway, if you did enjoy the video, please remember to give me a thumbs up, and if you have not already done so, please subscribe to the channel. That would be great. And I'd also like to thank my Patreon supporters at this point. Your names are on screen. Thank you very much for your continued support. If that interests you, check out the link in the direction. There is some exclusive content there, but otherwise I will see you here on YouTube in my next video. Once again, thank you very much for watching. I've been Richie, that Richie guy. See you in the next one. Macht's gut, Leute!